Hi, it's Jerry Roberts back again with a community conversation. And today we are joined by Council Member Eric Friedman, who is the chair of the Finance Committee. Thanks so much for joining us. Excuse me.
Great. Glad to be here, Jerry. Good to
How,
reconnect with
how
you.
has it been? How have the last couple months been for you with the pandemic? I know you got a couple of kids that have been at home and you've been out there working on the front line the whole time. How are you holding up?
I'm not going to lie, it's been mentally and physically exhausting, but that's why we're here. And, between city council and then two kids, I have 11 and 13 years old, trying to be there for them and figure out what to do or with them during this time. And my wife, Julie, also works at Goleta Valley ER. And then, of course, I work at the grocery store. So we're getting a frontline view of everything. So, but we're managing, just like I think everybody is in the same boat we are, just trying to make it through and doing the best we can and just
Yeah,
making sure we take care of ourselves.
little scary at the grocery store. People abiding by the mask regulations and so on?
Yeah, most people have been. We've hit kind of an equilibrium. I think people realize, it's for everyone's protection and there's going to be lines, but going in. But I think people appreciate the safety measures that have come in, and for the most part, are in somewhat okay spirits when they come in. I still think that when they go in, it's kind of a vacation from their daily lives because they still see us, the crew that they see all the time. We're friends with a lot of them, so it's just kind of a sense of normalcy somewhat. You can't, the one big thing, you can't tell when people are smiling anymore or not. So
Right.
but otherwise I think people are, they're adjusting, and they realize why we have to have all the protective measures we do.
All right. Fair enough. All right. I want to talk about the budget because the council has recently just adopted it. How much, what's the size of the budget?
So it's 345 million is the total city budget. It's about 133 million general fund, and then within the budget we also 292 is the operating overall the city, including our enterprise funds, and about another 58 million for capital investment throughout the city.
All right. I was just noodling around on the city's website, which is quite good, actually. It's very user friendly if you want to look up numbers and stuff. And basically, the budget has increased in the last decade, 2010, by 46%. You know what the rate of inflation's been during that time?
I don't, but I have a feeling you're going to tell me.
18%. So 18%, 46%. And I know you weren't there for most of the time, but just people who are paying taxes, say, how do you account for that? How come the city spending has increased so much more than inflation?
I think some of it comes from pension obligations that we've had to spend more into to make the CalPERS solvent. As those know, with the Great Recession came in back in over a decade ago, there were significant losses statewide. And as part of that, CalPERS has reassessed how the amount of money that local municipalities need to put into the system. And that is a significant, it's in the millions of dollars a year. It goes up every year because they've basically, long story short is we have to put in more because they've lowered the rate of return that they're getting on the investments. It's called the discount. And so we've had to make that up. That's one piece of it. The other is that there are more regulations that come in at state and local, state and federal regulations that have come in. And we also have new positions that our community is looking at in terms of, look at this year alone, we didn't fund them, but we're looking at an environmental department. So we can have economic sustainability department and those types of things, which are community priorities. So it has gone up, and but to our credit at the city, we have maintained our budget and allowed our reserves to be fully funded, which has helped us through this. So that was not by accident either, that we were able to get our reserves back up into fully funded reserves.
So the city administrator, Paul Casey, said about 2 months ago that we were headed for a quote unquote disaster financially, but by the numbers that are on the website, the budget actually went up 4%, 3.9% over year to year. How come? I mean, I'm confused about the disaster. It didn't happen.
It was projected to go up this year to about 373 million citywide, and it has come down. So we have cut the budget from what it was projected to be. A lot of that is built in on contracts that we have to fund, but overall, we did reduce it from what it was projected to be significantly. And we were able to use reserves to come in and fill the budget gap this year of 12.5 million. That was our reserves. And going into next year, we're looking at labor negotiations to reduce that even further. The point that we all need to be cognizant of in our community, especially us on council, is we don't know what the impacts to COVID are really going to be. And that's why this budget was a really difficult one to assess, because we don't know what the comeback is going to be in terms of our top industries or our top tax producing industries, such as transit occupancy tax and sales tax. So we are going to be revisiting this pretty much on a quarterly basis, if not more, on the budget to adjust our numbers accordingly. And right now we're at a balance. We're able to balance it this year with our projected revenues that are coming in, but those could change significantly, even as we're seeing now with a spike in COVID nationwide. And so we're definitely monitoring that.
So what are the biggest sources of revenue for the city?
So the largest is property tax that comes in at about 38 million. And then sales tax, there's two of them. There's Measure C and our regular sales tax, and those are coming in at approximately 22 million. And these are adjusted down for COVID related. They would have been at about $4 million each more, but we're at about 22 is what we budgeted. And the next is transit occupancy tax, which is about 17 million. It was projected prior to COVID to be about 20 million. So those are the major sources of revenue that we have. In particular, the transient occupancy tax has been the hardest hit because of the tourism loss that we've had. Sales tax, we're trying to figure that out because there are some losses, but there is the online revenue that's come up. And then the most stable is property tax. And because that is assessed the prior year and it's paid over time, it's stable, and the impacts generally lag about a year on what the property tax assessment will be. So that one has been more stable of the three.
Yeah, I know you took some political heat because you voted against one of the raises, or for one group of employees at least. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. First, I want to say I value the work of all of our city employees. In particular, SEIU, since this is the one we're talking about, they do a lot of the frontline work, and they are some of our least compensated employees in the city. And they're out there day in and day out. They're making our city run. And a lot of times we don't know what they do. We know what they do, but the public doesn't generally know that they're still out there. We have, everything from our water and our wastewater to our parks, our libraries, our IT department, and those types of things. But unfortunately, it was bad timing, and it's not fair to those employees that just because of timing that they didn't get the raises that the other employees got before, the other bargaining units. But at the same time, myself and Councilmember Jordan, while we value those employees, I also have to look at it as the city as a whole. And when I look at somewhere around 20% unemployment, industries that aren't, jobs that aren't going to come back, people not being able to pay their rent or their bills, I just couldn't make that decision, that determination that to give raises at that time. And I think for me, it was a matter of looking at the public and being able to say, hey, this is an extraordinary time, and we need to take all the measures we can. In addition, it gets back to what I was saying earlier, is we don't know what the impacts for finances of what COVID is going to do. If there's it's not even a second round, it's just an increase of this first round, is from what I'm hearing. And if we have the more that we can rely on our own local sources of revenue to maintain them, the better off we'll be. Because again, we don't know what Congress is going to do in terms of any statewide packages that's going to come out to us. So with that being the case, I couldn't make the determination that to give support a raise at that time, even though I know the valuable work that those employees do.
Yeah, there's been a lot of, amid the anti-racism protests, there's been a lot of discussion about the police budget, the police department, public safety, which just, for reference, has gone from 32.5 million to 47.1 million in 10 years, which is about 45% increase. What's your assessment of, amid all the calls to defund the police, is there money in there to go elsewhere?
So in the city in general, but in particular in our police department, we are a staff-heavy organization. So most of the money goes towards staffing. And our police our police are some of the most, when you look at it dollar-wise, significant portions of staff, and they're expensive, but for good reason, because of the training that we have to do, because of the protections they need to be out there and the services they provide. So when we talk about defunding the police, I don't think that is a term that I think gives us to a good community discussion on defunding them or not. I think the real question is, how do we reimagine or relook at some of the asks that we ask them to provide, or some of the services that we ask them to provide? For far too long, our country as a whole has not properly addressed mental health, social services, or other types of measures in a proactive way so that we can address those issues up front. And instead, what happens is they lag and issues come to a head, and we ask our police to address it. And when they do, it's not under the best ideal circumstances. It's being a reaction to potential crimes or others, and they're not trained to be mental health professionals or social services, but they do it anyways because we ask them to. And I think that's something that we as council members and the public, I think, generally understand. And part of what the proposals I put forward is to look at how we can be more responsive to mental health, be more social services, and even some kinds of quality of life issues that aren't necessarily policing, that we can take off of our officers' plate to allow them to focus on policing. The examples I give are, if a business opens up in the morning and there's a homeless individual sleeping on their porch, why do we have to call the police for that, when we should be calling a social service worker to come wake that person up and connect them to services? Another one that people understand as well when we're talking about kind of shifting or looking at priorities is the gas-powered leaf blower ban. It is a ban. There's environmental air quality impacts, and yet we've asked our police to enforce that. Why is that a police function when we could have a code enforcement staff do that instead? Because we really want to prioritize our police going to those types of calls. So I think it's a matter of working with the public, but also working with our police officers to understand how they spend their time and where they also feel they could better allocate their resources towards more policing. And it's a conversation that everybody needs to be included, in particular our police officers.
So you would reject the idea of defunding the police?
I think that most people think it's reallocating resources in a more humane manner. And I think even our police support that. From those that I've talked to, support that. So yeah, defunding is a term that when you look at it, it says you're defunding the police, which on its face of it is you bring it down to zero and you're not going to have a police department. A vast majority of the public understand that there is and there always will be a need for policing, but we want to have a police department that looks at the totality of the issues and is not being the first ones we call to respond to what are essentially social services types of calls. And the important distinction I need to make, though, is when we reallocate resources, it's not going to be if someone calls 911, we're going to send you a social services worker. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is when our librarians, who in this budget we also learned spend about 30% of their time dealing with homeless calls, when they call for assistance with a homeless individual, then rather than calling a police officer, which would add to that amount of time, they would call a social services worker. The benefit is that person is trained, or a mental health worker, that person is trained in social services and mental health, and they also have the ability to connect those individuals to services, and they can build a relationship up over time. And generally, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but generally they do not cost as much personnel-wise as a police officer does. So you're making economic sense and you're making a social sense as well.
So this reimagining policing process, two questions. One, what's the window? How long does that take? And what does that look like? And secondly, at the end of the day, does that mean that there will be fewer FTEs, fewer employees, salaries and benefits in the police department that will be elsewhere? Or are you talking about adding on?
I think that remains to be determined. As a societal shift, I think we are as a society moving towards investing more in our mental health and our social services on these upfront types of issues. But then in terms of, we have to really understand what are the cost savings, and then what are the actual needs of the police department, because it might be that there are backlogs in nuisance related crimes such as car burglaries, those types of things, where they could focus more of their time. So I think it's premature to say that we're going to hire X number of mental health and social workers and decrease X number of police. It might not be the case. It might be that we're able to hire more mental health and social service workers and code enforcement staff and others that are taking on these non-policing issues and still have a need for our police at that level. So I think that's all going to be discussed in the coming months and years.
So as you look down the road at the fiscal implications of this, is it your goal or notion that this would be revenue neutral, or that there would be cost savings with this?
Ideally, there would be cost savings because you end up addressing a lot of these issues on the front end before they become a crisis. When we have, one example is we're going to partner with the county to have a mental health professional with one of our officers. It's a program that's been successful at the county. If we're able to invest something like that where somebody is having a mental health issue and all they really need is for a professional to come and calm them down and get them to the services they need up front, then we save ourselves dollar-wise what it would cost to end up having that person escalated into a crisis where they end up getting arrested. And then once they go into the criminal system, there are tons of costs that we have. So ideally, it would be cost neutral because we'd be addressing many of these issues up front. It's the old, an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure, that type of thing.
All right, fair enough. I'm totally confused about what happened with Measure C. Measure C in 2017, voters overwhelmingly approved a tax on themselves, 1% increase in a local sales tax to go for infrastructure. And, in the campaign, it was pretty clear we were going to get a new police station. Now there was $2 million in the police station, I read, for the police station from Measure C money. I read on Newshawk that was taken out, which is exactly what opponents like, Frank Hotchkiss and Joe Armendariz and others said was going to happen, that you're going to start playing around with the money. Can you explain, are we still getting a new police station or not?
So that is still what is being moved forward. Let me just correct, we didn't just defund the police station of $2 million. What happened was the city administrator, Paul Casey, and his staff looked at the current status of the police station, and it's under environmental review right now. And so it's going through the environmental review process. And we had enough money currently allocated to get us through that complete process of the environmental review for the site at the Coda Street site. So rather than allocating $2 million at this time, when we still have to complete environmental review, it was let's complete that process. And then when that's done, then we determine what the next steps are for the police station. But by doing that, it frees up that $2 million to be invested in our streets, our libraries, or wherever we want. So it was more a matter of timing in terms of allowing the process that was already underway for the police station to go forward through the environmental review. And I will say that I completely understand, and I do feel that we have a responsibility to the council to consider what the promises were made during Measure C in terms of it being an infrastructure tax. I actually campaigned on the fact that I would not use Measure C for anything other than infrastructure, and I intend to stick to that.
I recall that.
Yep. And in terms of the police station itself, I think when we get to that point, whether it's a few months from now or early in the next year, that is when we have to have that conversation. I think right now, getting back to the first question you asked me, we are in the middle of a pandemic with severe economic hardships. We have social unrest, and there's other issues that are making this a very emotional time where you can make decisions if you're making them based on emotion or not taking the time to really think things out. We'll be in a better place once the environmental review comes out, because I still, on the vote I took to support the police station back in the fall of last year, what struck me most was not only is it seismically unsound, there's a lot of other issues, but we're talking about female police officers don't have proper facilities in the police station now. That is a gender equity issue. And when we talk about the type of police force that we want in the future, I think everybody would agree we want a 21st century police force that looks at having diversity among our force, including our female officers. So that is something that we need to consider when we're having this debate on whether or not we should move forward with the police station, one of many things. So there is a lot of discussion we need to have, and we need to take those things into consideration that we did back in the fall when we supported it, and letting it go through the environmental process. And at that time, we'll be in a better place to have those discussions. And I don't think right now, in the middle of all this, I'll just call it chaos, is a time to be making that type of decision.
What is the environmental review that you reference, is that for a particular design on a particular site?
Yeah, it's looking at the preferred site is the Coda Street lot, but when you're doing environmental, you're also looking at other alternatives. But those won't get the same level of review as the preferred location. And so that's what we're looking at, is the station on that site.
And what's the timetable for the results, seeing the results of that review?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's still in the process, and I think it's something that maybe later this year. It might even go into early next year. I don't have a timetable off the top of my head though right now.
All right. So just to be clear, is it still your intention to support the construction of a new police station with Measure C funds?
Yeah, I still think the police station is something that we need to do, and for the reasons I said. And so we'll have that greater community discussion. It might not be the design that we have now. We might be able to tweak it, and we might be able to add things that can really incorporate other community benefits out of it, not just the police station. So we really need to look at the space we have, the services that we need from our police, but there might be other city benefits or community benefits that we can get out of it. But again, that station is seismically unsound. And if you look at the role of our police that was the Thomas Fire and debris flow, just recently, Thomas Fire and debris flow, our 911 system, if we had an earthquake and that building seismically collapsed, it would not serve our community well. And that's where I think we really need to have that discussion at that time, so we can look at that location that's been presented. I know there's issues with the farmers market, but if you look at the State Street Promenade that's opening up there, and the thought that they were going to move to a certain location, there might be other opportunities for them to even have a greater success on State Street as well. So there's a lot of moving parts to it, but overall the answer is I still do support having a police station because it was part of the Measure C promise. And at that building, there's a gender equity issue and a seismic safety issue, among other things.
All right. One of the other issues in the resolution that you all adopted 7-0, declaring racism to be a public health crisis, was the adoption of a police review board. And as you know, Eric, there's that can cover a lot of different things, from just sort of an advisory group that meets once in a while with the chief, to an independent and independently funded with independent investigators operation that looks at police discipline issues. Where do you come down on that? What is your notion of what a police review board would look like in Santa Barbara?
Honestly, I'm still learning about the different options we have, and I am waiting to the July 21st meeting when the city attorney is going to come and present us options. I think one, we need to understand what the different options are. I don't fully understand the different ones that are before that we have now. I have a general census, but also it's important that we understand from the community what type of oversight there is, and then also legally what our options are, because the goal is to have more transparency in the process and oversight. And so depending on the different options out there, I'll be making my choice then. I don't have enough information on the different options now to say I'm committed to one or the other.
The resolution, when you read it, makes reference obviously to the killing of George Floyd and the Minneapolis police and several other notorious cases that we've seen. But is it your sense that we have a problem with the Santa Barbara Police Department in terms of misconduct, police brutality, violence, that we're not seeing, that somehow is being swept under the rug?
So I think a vast majority of our officers do an outstanding job. There are always certain circumstances and individuals that there are issues that get brought up. I think that leads to this. And the reality of the experience that I have is different from somebody who is of a different color, who has different interactions with the police, and I fully recognize that. And I'm trying to understand from their perspective, those who say that they do have negative interactions with the police, what is the frequency? How is that affected on a daily basis for you, if it is a daily basis? And what can we do so that we can build that trust within the community there? So I think depending on your experience, the answer varies. And I think we have an opportunity here to really listen. And that's what we've been doing as a council, and to come up with some solutions so that everyone has a more positive interaction with our police. And again, most of our police, I think, are doing an outstanding job. And there are some that go out in the community that are really valued. And so I think it's a matter of trying to build the trust between marginalized communities who have negative experiences and listening to them to try to move that forward.
But are you in possession of any information that suggests to you that there is a problem of a broad problem of police misconduct in the Santa Barbara Police Department?
I don't have specific, if you're looking at specific reports, there are some out there, but in terms of one that I can point to right now and saying it's this much percentage of that are being pulled over or not, no, I don't have that right here off the top of my head, but I do know that the experiences of the community at large are saying there is. And I think that when you have a segment of the population that is saying there are issues, we have to do our diligence to, one, understand those concerns, and then two, how do we address them?
Okay. So I heard you're running for mayor.
I've heard that too.
Yeah, are you making preparations to run for mayor?
So I'll just say that it is highly unlikely that I would run for mayor. For me, I think it's more of where am I best served in the city right now? Where can I do my best service? And I think right now, I've talked about it with my family, is that the position I'm in the district I'm in, to one, not only for that district, but look at it citywide, is in a good place. And I think that I'm in a position to help my colleagues, some of them who are newer on the council, to understand city processes and go forward. And that's where I'd prefer to be. And at the end of the day, it's something that, yeah, it's out there, but I'm not going to think about it right now, because the reality is right now we're in front of us, and I am the representative of my district and of the entire city. And that's what I'm focusing on right now. And whatever happens next year happens next year. It's not really in my control next year. So I don't really want to get ahead of anything.
So you're leaving the door wide open is what it sounds like.
I'm leaving it open a crack, because you never say never, because as we've learned in the last 3 months, whoever thought you have a pandemic, economic collapse, and social unrest all in the same time. But for me, again, I'll give you an example of where it is, because you like history, Jerry. General George Marshall, back in World War II, everyone thought FDR was going to appoint him to be the Allied command leader, but he had this, and it's something that's resonated, he had this trait about him, his character trait that he had, that he would never let his own ambitions get in front of what is best for the country. So he wouldn't specifically, when asked by FDR, do you want to lead Allied command, he never would say yes. And FDR ended up going with Eisenhower. That's the way I approach it. It's not something that I really want to go out and say, I want to do this or that. This is where I'm at as the elected representative for the 5th district. And that's where I'm at now. And that's what I'm focusing on. The future is the future. I'm not going to get too far out there. And it is most likely that I will run. And that's what I'm planning to do, is run for re-election for the 5th district. That's what I'm planning to do right now.
So next year, one of 3 things will be true. You'll either run for re-election in the 5th district, you'll decide not to run for anything, or you'll run for mayor. How would you weight each of those options?
Running for re-election is the most likely scenario. Not running is actually, considering what we've just been through, I do weigh that as well. And I've seen what's happened to Kathy over the last few weeks. And even though she's had her challenges and successes, but that's stuff that weighs on all of us, that what she's had to go through, because I feel really badly that she's had to go through that, those hours and hours of attacks on the council. And that's something that really weighs on all of us. And I think the situation now is just the emotions that we're all in. We're all tired as a community, making those decisions. So that's even more likely me not running for re-election than me running for mayor. That's what I want to say, how unlikely it is that I will run for mayor.
But you wouldn't be considering it if you thought she had been doing a good job.
I think it's really up to her to go forward and say if she's running or not. I won't run against Kathy. I'll say that right now. I would not run against Kathy. And but like I said, who knows what's going to happen down the line for that. So again, I'm preparing to run for re-election in my district. That's where I'm at now, and that's where I expect to be. But as the world's taught us, you never know.
Not going to rule it out.
No.
Okay, real quick, just one more thing on the agenda for council next week. You and council member Alejandro Gutierrez, bringing up 711 Milpas Street, the development that's had a lot of controversy about it. And you say in your letter, it's highly unusual to seek council approval of streamlined development project amendments outside the normal city planning processes. How come you're doing it?
This is a very unique project. It was very controversial when it came to when it went through the whole process, and then when it came to the council on appeal, it was very highly unusual at that time because we weren't even voting on the project at the time when we had it. We were voting on whether or not it conformed to the project design approval. So it was a very limited scope of what we could even review at the time. My sense is that that project, there are a lot of community concerns with the project in terms of its aesthetics, and just beginning with those and other things. So when the project developer and the owner came back and said they want to modify the project to actually better meet the community needs, both for affordable housing and aesthetic wise and others, and there wasn't a way to get a substantial conformity through the normal process, I felt when I was approached that this was something for the council to consider, because the alternative is they're not going to go through the whole process again, another 2-3 year process or whatever it is to redesign that project from scratch. And they will just build this project that is something that the community has serious concerns about because they already have a vested right to do so. So in this case, because there was a prior approved project that could be built and will be built, unless we kind of got creative and tried to see if we could get a better project through this means. That's why I want to explore this path to see if that's possible.
All right. So the community development director, George Buell, has resigned. That's a $13.4 million department over there. Someday we'll have a conversation about where that money goes. But so what do you want to see happen in community development now that it's headed for new leadership?
Well, I think one, we need to really look at the culture within the department, and just having a uniform set of visions and ideas for the staff to get behind. And then we also need to look at just our processes and our improvement. And that's what we're going to be doing. Myself and Councilmember Jordan and Alejandro Gutierrez this past Tuesday were appointed to the oversight committee for the implementation of the Cosmont, not the Cosmont, that's the other one, the Novak report and the grand jury. So we will have more accountability for council, from council in terms of that, and just looking at someone for a new director who would look at how you can be transformative, but also appreciate our staff and bring in some best practices. So I think we have an opportunity here to address some longstanding issues.
All right. Eric Friedman, thank you so much. You got a lot on your plate. You got kids running around. You're trying to do your best at work and on the council. And, you know, I appreciate, I think a lot of people appreciate how hard you work and what you put into it. And thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jerry. Always good to catch up with you.
Okay, man. I'll talk to you.
Thanks.